Hi, this is Jonathan J, and welcome to this YouTube channel all about buying a business. On this channel, you will find hundreds of videos all about buying a business. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe and tap the notifications bell so you receive a notification every time I release a new video. Now, today we've got something a little bit different. We're going to be talking to an expert about how to sell a business successfully. I think what you will find interesting about this video with Patrick Ungashick is that he also sees it from the buyer's perspective, and he gives some really useful tips on how to buy a business as well as how to sell a business. I hope you enjoyed. So, Patrick, tell us a little bit about yourself and what positions you to be the expert on business sellers and people wanting to sell their company.
Sure. Well, so today I am CEO of a company located here in Atlanta, Georgia, in the States called NAVIX Consultants. NAVIX as in navigating towards your exit. And nobody knows everything in this field. I've been doing this for close to 30 years now. I spent my first 6 to 8 years, JJ, doing the investment banking, mostly working with sellers, helping them get themselves and their company ready for exit. And I saw a lot of very successful companies and a lot of very successful owners struggle on the sale process and the sales side. And so we've learned from those client engagements, and then I've been involved in a little bit more than 300 over the last 30 years.
Fantastic. So what's going through the business owner's head when they start thinking about selling their company?
A lot of emotions, a lot of fear. They pretty quickly tend to recognize that there's a lot that they should know but maybe don't know. I mean, most owners sell only once, as you know, JJ. So it's a very much a journey for them. And typically their thinking starts with outcomes that they want to make sure that they achieve or avoid, right? I want to make sure that I get the financial win that I know I need to get to provide for me and my family. I want to avoid walking away from this feeling like the whole thing fell apart. And I did not uphold those values, that written or unwritten, formal or informal, those values that I have led my company on all these years.
I mean, in my experience, and I've had several exits, some of them substantial ones. The feeling, even if you have some experience of doing this, is that the moment you sign the agreement with whoever's representing you, you feel as though, yeah, it's going to happen. The business has been sold. And when you sign heads of terms, oh my goodness, the deal is done. And you need that reality check to realize that it's the beginning of a very long process.
Oh, I completely agree with you. The reality check needs to happen all the way through. You raise an important point in the process. I'll make another observation. It's very easy to get a business owner or a room full of business owners talking and to hear something like, oh, I get offers to buy my company all the time. Respectfully, those are not offers. Those are inquiries. Those are emails. That's not an offer to purchase your company. So the language that you'll hear a lot of business owners who anticipate selling, the language that they use is really out of sync with reality and out of sync with the full process involved to successfully sell a company.
When I'm talking to owners who've contacted me because they want to sell, I count the minutes before that person says, oh, by the way, I'm not desperate. Or there are lots of people interested, and it's almost like it's just repetitive. Why do you feel that owners feel the need to tell the person interested in their company that they are not desperate to sell?
A little bit of a defense mechanism. I know if I come across as desperate, I'm going to somehow lose on price or terms and somehow be on the wrong side of the negotiating advantage. And most of the time, not always, of course, but most of the time, there's a little bit of validity to that, and that they enjoy the company they built, especially if they're the founder. And the thought of going back to work tomorrow is not abhorrent, but that can change on a day-by-day basis. So it's a mix, I think, of a little bit of reality and also a little bit of, oh my gosh, I really don't know what I'm signing up for. So I better appear as though that I don't need this, otherwise I'm going to be in trouble.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, you know, we know that the preparation for sale should be as far in advance of that moment as possible. But
Yes.
what's the reality, Patrick?
The reality is when we're talking with business owners who say they want to sell one day, when they get to the point where they're telling themselves, JJ, that they think they want to sell sometime in the next 5 years, we're already telling them you're already in the homeward stretch. First of all, 5 years flies by. That's 60 months. By this, this time next month, you're down to 59 and so on. Also, as you know, buyers typically want to see 5 years of financials. So the financial results that you're booking right now are going to be part of the value discussion and process. Also, it takes a year or longer sometimes to sell a business. So if you think you want to exit in 5 years, you're only got 4 years of preparation time left. Um, the reality is a lot of business owners don't move that quickly and that early. They wait till they're down closer to a 2 year or even a 1 year desired time horizon. And then what often happens is they're in triage mode. You've really got to pick and choose the things that you're going to fix or improve or ready. And there's going to be significant, materially important other issues that you're going to look at and say, we just don't have time to get to that.
So many of the owners that I speak to, when I ask them what their ideal time scale is,
Right.
tell me yesterday or
Yes.
today or tomorrow. So,
Yes.
which tells me there's been very little planning in this, and they reach that point of desperation of I just need to get out of this.
Yes.
Maybe not because the business is a bad business, but because they've fallen out of love with it, and they feel that it's just very stressful for
Right.
whatever reason. Usually, it's the staff that are stressing them, all those management issues that are stressing them. So
Right.
from the other side, what do what's your perspective on it from the sell side?
Oh, that's absolutely true. There's a normal, natural life cycle that comes with being a business owner. They're in love with it in the beginning. What's the phrases we use? It's my third child. It's my second love. It's my life's passion, and all those emotions are genuine, especially in the beginning. But a lot of with success comes responsibility. With size comes risk. And a lot of business owners, if you would have said to them 20, 30 years ago when they started, hey, one day, do you want to wake up and be responsible for 25 or 50 or 250 jobs? Do you want to have 80 to 90% of your net worth tied up in one illiquid asset? Do you want to sign your life away of the bank every time your line of credit renewal happens? All those realities begin to wear. And if they haven't planned ahead, and unfortunately, way too many business owners have not planned ahead, then they find themselves scrambling and reacting to the crisis of the day, the bad news of the week, and looking around going, I do want to get out of here yesterday. And as you know, JJ, that's not an outcome that's going to drive success for a lot of sellers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so, do you feel that money is the number one priority for a seller?
Money is almost always the number one priority because, what we see as the most common goal is reaching financial freedom. Now, financial freedom has become a bit of a buzz phrase. We actually put a definition around it when we're working with sellers. Financial freedom means if you continue to work, you're doing so because you choose to, not because you have to. And that's a place that I think most people aspire to get to. And
Hmm.
if I don't reach financial freedom, as long as my business is viable, why sell? And I just go back to work. But that's an aspiration, and it stays, in our experience, JJ, it stays pretty constant through the sale process. But the surprise for a lot of sellers is the other goals that creep into the conversation that have a weight and a priority to them that a lot of sellers don't really expect. Meaning, okay, great, you need 5 million, 10 million, whatever the number is in order to walk away and be financial free. But there's a difference between getting cash at closing versus not getting cash at closing. So terms often creep into the conversation, and as they better understand what that means, all of a sudden, oh, okay, I'm maybe less focused on price, and I'm now more focused on terms. And then also, how are my people going to be treated, and what sort of service level is the customer going to experience going forward? I'm not saying that those issues take precedence over price or money, but they tend to nudge up there towards the top. And a lot of sellers then struggle with a lot of mixed and often conflicting aspirations and goals through the sale process.
Do you feel that many sellers start off with unrealistic expectations with regards to price?
I feel that most sellers start out with unrealistic expectations of price. You know, there's a little bit of thought bias in there. You know, it's my baby, it's the prettiest baby that's ever lived. So we all have that natural human tendency. There's a financial reality that I think leads to inflated prices, which is the business owner, you know, maybe pulling home 500,000, $1 million a year of income if they're, you know, more successful than not. But that's usually a mix of profits and wages and salary and bonus, and you know, and that's the income level that they need to support their lifestyle. Well, when you sell, you're often monetizing those future profits, but you're not monetizing that paycheck, because the buyer is going to either keep that as an add back, or they're going to turn around and need to replace the seller.
Hmm.
And so the seller often looks at the level of personal income they enjoy and say, well, I need a price that's going to replace dollar for dollar all of this level of personal income. And a lot of that personal income is tied to their job, and those dollars don't get replaced at sale usually. So it's a mix of emotions and also some unrealistic understanding as to how valuation works.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I'm primarily a buyer rather than a seller. So
Right.
I buy, and then I sell, and I buy, and then I sell. So I spend more time thinking about it from the buy side. What do you think then is going through the head of the seller when they meet a potential buyer? What's the dance look like?
That's a great question, because if you're a want to be successful as a buyer of companies, then the more you understand the dance and the more you can empathize and put yourself in the seller's shoes, the much more likely you are to be successful. First of all, successful with closed deals, but also I'm going to add into the definition of success here, successful in avoiding deals that'll never close. Because a lot of sellers get cold feet, a lot of sellers can waste a lot of potential buyers' times on that dance floor, when you really, with the benefit of hindsight, looking to and looking back 2020, you can say, ooh, there were signs early on in the dance that I could see that this seller was not ready, and there was a low likelihood of doing a deal here.
Yeah.
So the financial situation that the seller is in is very important to a buyer. I mentioned before, is 80-90% of this person's net worth tied up in the company? That's a very different selling position than if the seller has managed to somehow build wealth outside the company over the years. How dependent is the company on that owner, or if there's multiple owners? Because if the company is able to function and sell and service clients without day-to-day involvement with the owner, then the owner is probably in a lower stress, more opportunity to be more planned process. If the
Yes.
owner has to work 40, 60, 80 hours a week, 52 weeks out of the year, otherwise the thing falls apart, that's an emotional roller coaster that owner is probably on. And the more the buyers can recognize those signs, the more that they can ask more questions and do more owner level due diligence up front to see if a deal is even feasible there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say about, you know, how much time they spend in the business, because I think that if a seller knows one thing about selling a company, they know that they need to remove themselves from the day to day in order to realize the value.
Yes.
And every conversation I seem to have with an owner of a business does go along the lines of, I have very little to do with it. I just pop in occasionally. And, you know, the staff never see me. When the reality is they're actually working 90-hour weeks. So yeah, is this you know, are sellers coached to to give the impression they have nothing much to do with the business, where actually the reality is they do?
They are coached. Hopefully, they've been working with people early enough in the process to make it more than just a fiction and actual reality. I mean, there are questions that both sides can ask. These are the questions that we help the future seller be prepared for and have good and truthful answers to.
Yeah.
But questions like, okay, great, the company can run without you. Wonderful. When's the last time you took 2 weeks off or 30 days off and unplugged from the company? No emails, no phone calls, maybe a touch base once a week. But have you ever done that? And you know, when we start working with sellers, future sellers, JJ, very often the answer is no. And well, if the answer is no, then why not? And let's do that. Let's verify and validate that this company can survive and thrive without you. Because if I'm a future buyer, I'm going to be asking that same question a couple of years from now when you are sitting across the table from a future buyer. So they're coached, but it's not hard to kind of dig into reality. And hopefully, the reality is that the potential
Sure.
seller, has built something that can run without him or her.
Which is what we want. The buyer
Yeah,
wants that. We
sure.
don't want it to be reliant upon that person,
Right.
but quite often the cost of replacing them isn't one person, it's maybe three people because they wear so many different hats. And of course that impacts the value.
It does. And also all that institutional knowledge that resides
Yeah.
just in between the two ears of the seller, those relationships that run through the seller's fingers, all of that creates risk for the seller and the buyer.
So if you're advising someone on selling their business, what are the key factors that they need to consider in order to get the very best value for the company?
Uh, think about the business. There's a phrase we use, JJ, and the phrase we use is transferable value. So think about the business and look at it through the lens of your future buyer. And what's your future buyer going to be concerned about? Sure, they're going to look at top line and bottom line financial performance and key metrics in between. But they're also going to look at, we just mentioned one, we call it owner dependency, is one of the areas that drives value that transfers. It's wonderful that I might be making X amount of money per year for my company, but if my company can't survive without me, that value doesn't transfer upon sale. So owner dependency is one. Another one we haven't mentioned is customer concentration, or hopefully the desired outcome, an inverse of that, customer diversification. Again, I might be making a lot of money and growing my company, but if I'm doing it on the back of 2, 3, 4 large accounts, a buyer is going to come along and more often than not see risk in that, so that value may not transfer. Build a strong leadership team, a team that can run the company without me, and have scalability and sustainability in my key systems. Those are functions and value points that when a potential buyer sees those, a potential buyer is going to see lower risk, greater likelihood of success. The seller should, in a perfect system and when well represented, the seller should walk away with higher value as a result.
Yeah, no, that's really excellent. And from my own experience, I found that a well-timed acquisition to grow the size of a business, in actual fact, is a very fast way of adding value, because if you can add an extra 20, 25, 30%, even 50% to the size of your company with an acquisition, then you've done a job that the buyer might have to do, but you can reap the rewards from it.
Oh, absolutely. It's transformative. And that's one reason why when as you know, we work predominantly with sellers. A lot of times sellers will see what happens in the market and they'll scratch their head and say, where's the logic in this? Meaning I go to market and hopefully I get multiple offers to choose from. Let's just say I get 5 and one of them is way down low and 2 or 3 are in the middle and one of them is ridiculously higher than the others. Is it like these people can't do math? No, it's not that they can't do math, is that buyers have different motives. And a phrase I learned a long time ago is motive drives multiples. So you're right. For the right buyer, the right acquisition can be transformative, either in terms of volume or market share or some sort of expansion that gives them this huge competitive advantage, which means that buyer is willing to pay so much more. Sellers got to understand that, and sellers got to be ready and hopefully run a thorough enough process at the opportunity to talk to multiple buyers and find the one that is the best fit. And part of best fit is willing to pay the kind of price that we hope to achieve.
And how much do you feel that competitive tension between buyers drives price?
A lot. It does, which is one reason why buyers usually want to make sure they're the only one on the dance floor, right? Of course.
Of course.
Um, but, you know, buyers and sellers behind those labels are people, and people have competitive energy and juices. And we see frequently we get multiple buyers in the conversation, and nobody wants to be the loser. Nobody wants to go back to their team or their boss and say, we missed out on this acquisition after having internally justified it and promoted it so hard. Nobody wants, and especially if you do lose out on the acquisition, you're typically losing out to one of your closest competitors. So yeah, that dynamic, if you're working on the sell side, That dynamic is critical to achieve if you can, to try and get that competitive pressure and competitive negotiation and tension among a handful of buyers at the end of the process.
And I suppose if you've only got one buyer, then the illusion of there being an auction for the business is helpful as well.
If yeah, we always want to be honest. You're right, but if we can drop the necessary hints and say, well, we're talking to just you, but I'm not desperate, right? So if
Mm.
this conversation doesn't play out in a certain way, maybe we will go talk to a couple competitors. That's a pretty old tactic. As a potential buyer, you need to be able to see through that and try and keep the negotiation among just those two parties if you're thinking on the buy side.
So I always advise buyers to remove the emotion. And the more emotion there is when you're buying, the worse deal that you'll get.
Yes.
Is the converse also true
The
with
converse
from the sell side?
is also true, but much harder to achieve. Most of the time, I mean, if you stop and think about it, the buyer has a handful of incredibly significant advantages over the seller in most situations. The emotions is one of them. Most of the time, if I'm the seller, it's my company. I've had it typically for decades. It's my pride and joy. It's impossible to separate the emotions out from the company that I had built and led all those years. Whereas the buyer, yeah, emotions can definitely swirl with the buyer, but they're typically never going to reach that peak, never going to reach that intensity. That's just one advantage. Other advantages is who has the money. Usually the buyer has the money and the seller lacks it, certainly on a liquid basis. So when you go down the list, if a buyer is prepared and organized and experienced and knows what they're doing, they have some very powerful advantages all the way through the process, and buyers should use them.
How do you feel the market for M&A is going to change as a result of the pandemic?
A great question, and one that there's a lot of very smart people thinking about right now. Due diligence is going to have to be rethought all the way through. I mean, in the immediate sense, here we are in late spring, creeping into early summer. Just the physical on-site activity of due diligence is already, for deals that are in motion right now, is already an open question. I think eventually get figured out, but buyers are going to have to learn how to do more due diligence earlier in the process on a remote basis in order to reduce risk before we actually get to physical on site.
Yeah.
So due diligence, I think, is going to change dramatically. Uh, Definitions of infrastructure costs are changing as we speak. I mean, what's a fixed cost now? I know what it was just a few months ago. I'm uncertain what you would call fixed cost today with regards to facilities and people. I mean, so much of this is changing. And then think about the impact on both earnings and expenses for a lot of companies right now. A lot of companies are doing some extraordinary, hopefully non-recurring activities. That's going to stay on their financial statements for the next 3 to 5 years. And companies got to hopefully have really good financial systems and be prepared to show this is what we did way back in 2020. Remember coronavirus? And this is how we handled it, and this is why our financials look that way, because there's a lot of anomalies happening right now. So it's a pretty broad impact. You're absolutely right.
So let's say you're advising someone whose business has been hit and maybe they've had to close, and that's going to leave a 4-5 month dent in their finances, and then there's the recovery time out the other side, but that person still wants to sell. What's your advice to them?
Um, Work with advisors who know what they're doing and be looking hard at your situation, because and figure out the best plan, because every situation is different. I'll give you a real example. We have an organization that we work with that runs a chain of physical therapy locations. Call it 30, 40 locations. Their business is basically shut down because of the nature of what they do, but that's temporary. If you believe at some point that business is going to come back, then so long as you got a healthy balance sheet and a quality management team, you got to figure out how you survive through that. And buyers and investors are eager for companies like that. They believe eventually that business is going to recover. So is it a temporary setback given, the public health crisis, or is it a more permanent threat to who you were, who you are, and how you operate? I think is an important question. What's your region of the country? We have another client that we're working with right now that's an energy distributor, a petroleum company, and what part of the region in the U.S. they're located in is already determining how strong their sale opportunity is in the near term. So you got to look at what you do and how your business model functioned. You have to look at your geography. You have to look at where your team is. I wish I could generalize and say, well, here's the answer, and you just apply it to your situation. But boy, every situation seems to be different right now.
So, what would your advice be to someone who knows that at some point they will be selling their company? They haven't got to the point of, I've got to do it now, but they know
Right.
at some point that they want to sell. What should they be thinking about? And how far ahead should they be planning this?
Uh, that 5 years is that tipping point. We go back to when you're at 5 years, you're in the homeward stretch, and it's time to be not just thinking in abstract terms, but it's time to be defining your goals with clarity, and then looking around and seeing what needs to be done to have the best chance to achieve those goals. So that's the starting point. What should else they be doing is getting an education. You don't have to be an expert in this process. That's why you work with quality advisors through the process. But you certainly need to know the basic procedure and process, and know the basic terminology and the basic building blocks. And a lot of sellers who have never sold before just don't know it. I mean, it never fails to surprise me. Terminology like adjusted EBITDA. You'll ask a business owner, says, "Oh, I want to sell my company in a few years." All right, what's your adjusted EBITDA? What's that mean? So you've got to be able to speak the basic language and understand the basic issues. And it's not rocket science, so it's approachable, but it takes time and takes commitment. It takes a willingness to learn an important new subject, and make sure that you have the time to do it. You're not so busy running the company that you don't have the time to step away and get the education that you need.
Fantastic. So, Patrick, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Sure. The best place to start is our website, which is NAVIX, NAVIX Consultants.com. And my contact information is on there, as well as others from our team. We also have, because we do work with sellers who have typically never sold before, we also have quite a lot of educational materials right there. And one that I would point out is a free ebook called Your Last 5 Years. And JJ, that ebook is everything you need to know and do and start to put in place in terms of steps and process and planning when you are at that point where you're saying, I think sometime in the next 5 years, I might want to sell, and I want it to be a successful outcome.
Fantastic. So I'd encourage our listeners to head over there and get a copy of that. Patrick, thank you very much indeed.